And I said, come over, come on over, you'll say.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the Town of Portland podcast. We're live here in the Town Tech Educational Podcast Studio at Portland High School. And with us in the studio is our first select woman, Ms. Susan Bransfield. And on the phone calling in, we have our Director of Health from the Chatham Health District, Mr. Russ Melmid. So, hi, guys. How we doing?
Very well. Good to see you.
Russ, did you enjoy your vacation?
It was wonderful. It really, really was.
Nice. Now you're back in the barrel here.
Back.
So anyway, great. So Susan, we're getting down to the end of your tenure here.
That's for sure. Yeah, I see a few signs around town. I think there's an election going on, Dave.
That's the rumor.
Nice to be able to ignore that for a change.
Yes. It's kind of fun to watch them and see them. They all look lovely. No matter who you're supporting, we always say, make sure you go out and vote.
That's the bottom line.
Yeah. And it's fun. I think it's all in good taste this time, and everybody's really doing a nice job presenting their opinions and their issues, and we'll look forward to November 2nd.
Absolutely. So anyway, so let's give us the down low on what's going on.
Sure. There's lots going on, Dave. Last week we opened the bids. We had 4 bids for the cleanup of the Brownstone Avenue brownfield that the town owns.
Yeah.
And Amy Valancourt from Ty and Bond is evaluating the bids. And it looks like we'll be able to do some of the work that includes the cleanup, mostly on that bigger lot, that 248 where the big above-ground storage tanks used to be.
Yes. Uh-huh.
That's where there seems to be the most need to remove soil. So we're looking at how we can utilize the dollars that we have to do that cleanup. There's certainly other things that were in the bid that we don't have enough money for, and we knew that would happen. The grant was written in 2016, and here we are in 2021 in a COVID-19 environment.
Sure.
The area that is seeming to be a little expensive is paving. You know, getting the construction part of the job is something that we'll probably wait on until we have a developer, till we have someone that we know is interested in the redevelopment and the utilization in terms of giving us some tax dollars back for that property. And in speaking with the state, there is another opportunity that we'll be applying for. It's called a topper, which is part of the grant application process that we're already in. And it would be up to 50% more that they would give us for something that we feel is a good bid. We feel we do have some good bids. One in particular is looking positive at this point. And we know that it's critical time sensitive. So these numbers will hold for a certain amount of time.
Right.
And with the extra dollars, that would be very helpful. So Mary Dickerson, our Director of Planning, will be working with me and Amy in putting in that request. And I can't say enough good things about the Department of Economic and Community Development, who runs the Brownfield cleanup program. They're really doing a great job, and they're good partners with us. So we look forward to knowing more about that as time goes on.
Sure.
Some of the other projects, you've done a nice job, Dave, on our website.
Yeah, we try to keep up with it.
Yeah, no, you are. And when we log in there, you'll see that there's a lot of particularly public work activity going on right now. The town hall parking lot is being completely redone.
Yes, it is nice.
It is going to be really something that will last a long time. We appreciate everybody's patience. I know we've been parking on East Main and Fairview Streets in particular, and it should be wrapping up here in the next several days, so we should be able to go back in and park once it gets striped and lined and all that.
I guess they're coming in tonight to put the curbing on, and Bob said, I believe the Constantine is going to be coming in and striping over the weekend to get their parking places. So,
good. Yeah.
So hopefully it'll give a little bit of time over the weekend for the new asphalt to set up, and then hopefully we'll be back in work, back in business on Monday.
Yeah, he really did quite a job. I was watching him from my window upstairs, and it really quite a project, the reclaiming and then the repaving and so forth. Nice job, Public Works, under your direction. Really doing a great job. They're also repaving a portion of Grove Street.
Yep.
And I think, Dave, do you know the status of that? I think that's
It is done.
been done. Okay.
It is done. I don't know what the status, if they're putting curbing down there or not, but if they're going to be doing the curbing crew is coming in tonight. So,
Okay.
and we'll see how. But it's very, very nice.
Yeah.
I mean, all of that, pavement that was damaged due to a lot of the water breaks that were around there. It's like a superhighway now.
Yeah. They reclaim it and reuse it. So it's really quite a process, my understanding. We did that on High Street, I think it was last year or the year
Yes.
before. And we're looking forward to doing more of those kinds of projects. They really improve our streets and our roads nicely. On Monday, we're going to be seeing some more sidewalk replacement on Fairview Street from the area from High Street down to about Foley Road, right
Yep.
in that neighborhood. And then a little bit on East Main, where the sidewalks going north from the town hall really need to be improved. So we're looking to see that be done. And from the selectmen's meetings, we named a poet laureate this past week.
Yes.
And it's Najee Chester Payne, who is really quite a talented young man in terms of expressing what we're feeling and how important that is these days to be able to understand how we all share some of the great days and the not so great days.
Absolutely, and well deserved. The poet that he read at the September 11th memorial we did behind the town hall was so powerful, unbelievable.
Yeah, and I like the way Najee draws you in.
He does. He engages you.
Yeah, it's like having a back and forth, almost
Yes.
a dialogue.
Exactly.
And I'm really, really quite impressed. And congratulations to him for that very nice. He was nominated by members of our community, and it is, as you say, very, very well deserved.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So, I think that's all I have at this point, Dave. And
All right. Well,
anxious to hear about our health and how we're doing in the district.
yes, well, we missed Russ on our last podcast and so forth, and there's a lot of water been going under the bridge here, Russ, so bring us up to date.
Literally. Let's back up. We have had one of the wettest summers the state has ever seen, July and August.
Yeah.
Just a tremendous amount of water coming down, which is good for reservoirs, for example. This time last year, we were in a moderate drought in most of the state, and this area included. So it's nice to see that we're not dealing with a drought, but when you have the kind of volume of water that we've had, it does cause some problems. So we've had a few people who had some well issues. Wells get inundated when there's flooding, for example, and it brings in surface water into your drinking water, and it can cause some contamination issues. So just recommend anybody listening that if you had some local flooding, if you had some water that came near your well cap, if you know where that is on your property, to get your water tested, it's not a bad idea because we have seen some of that go on. We saw some septic system failures because we had some systems get inundated. So good to have rainfall, good to have full reservoirs, but when you get so much rain in such a short period of time, it does cause some problems. We also had in the region, not specifically in Portland, but we did have, with so much rainfall, we get a lot of runoff into our lakes, streams, ponds, and whatnot, and that causes some problems. Occasionally we'll see blue-green algae blooms that occur. Usually they're fleeting. They'll look like, almost like spilled paint on the top of the surface of the water, and those blue-green algae, they're naturally occurring, but when you get this runoff, you get all the, what I'll call nutrients for the blue-green algae, but you might call sort of fertilizer that you put on your lawn, gets washed out into these ponds, and it causes these blue-green algae blooms. So for anybody who was out there and they looked at the pond or the lake or the stream that they typically go fishing in or swimming in or whatever and saw this unusual green color, it might have been blue-green algae because we had so much rain and so much runoff, and all that fertilizer gets washed into those water bodies, feeds blue-green algae. You just get an overabundance of them sometimes. So, but the weather's cooling off now, so we shouldn't be seeing too much blue-green algae, hopefully, soon. But it was an interesting summer, that's for sure, when it came to that. Our environmental health staff was very busy processing permits and applications for people putting on additions to their homes and decks and putting in outbuildings and sheds. There was some new construction. So it's been a very busy summer for Chatham Health District for all our staff. I think, I'll just give a kudos to our environmental health staff. They do such a great job to process things in a speedy way. We are not just regulators, but we are sort of a key cog in economic development to make sure that things get done and done safely and done in a smart way that are up to code. But at the same time, we do it fast enough that we typically are not sort of hindrances for people who are trying to get work done. And we've got such a big, robust environmental health staff now, unlike many other local health departments in the state are struggling with staffing. We've brought a couple of new staff on board in the last couple of years. They're young, and they're now just sort of hitting their strides. The sanitarian who typically works in the Portland office, Zach Jezik, is our newest sanitarian.
Yes.
And he's just been great, and he's really coming into his own now as a sanitarian. He's 2 years into the job, not all with Chatham Health District. He's only been with us 6 months, but Zach was in another local health department for about a year and a half before he came on board here. And he really is hitting his stride now. He's really capable of doing just about everything that we ask our sanitarians to do. So I think we're fortunate to have now 6 sanitarians for our 6 towns in the Chatham Health District. So we're pretty fast with our turnaround time. Somebody's submitting an application to put in an addition. Those usually get turned around within a week.
Great.
So that's pretty fast. There's some other local health departments in the state that really struggle with staffing right now, and I think we're just fortunate in that regard.
For sure.
So thanks to Susan and the Board of Health for really working with me to bring on new staff, to bring on young staff, new staff. It's difficult for a time period because they don't have the kind of experience they need, and but you always have to look to the future with these kinds of things. And I think right now we're reaping the benefits of having some young staff having come on board a while back there.
Right. Well, I think how many years has Don Mitchell been there? And I think
right. We lost. Don Mitchell, Steve Knopf. They were
Yes.
sanitarians. I think when those 2 individuals retired, each within about 4 months of one another, we lost 70 person years of experience in environmental health.
Yeah, that's a lot of knowledge base that walks out the door.
That's a lot of knowledge. It's a lot of institutional history and knowledge of the local area as well. They were sanitarians who worked. Don worked in Portland for 30 plus years.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
You don't replace the institutional knowledge. Certainly, you can replace the sanitarian, you can replace the body, but you can't replace all that institutional knowledge. So I still do talk to Don periodically. He still retains a lot of the information and the memory about what he did in certain places. So we've had some interesting things come up, and I'll call Don and say, Don, do you remember what happened at this property? And
exactly.
He really still, so even though Don's not working for us anymore, he's still available as an asset. We can call Don. But it's tough. You lose those. I think there's a lot of industries in the state of Connecticut that are dealing with an aging workforce.
Yeah. No, exactly. And I think that's not only, throughout all of the industries. I know in the water industry, we're, dealing with that. Either it's a bald or gray tsunami, whatever you want to call it. But people are walking out the door, and unfortunately, the people that are coming to fill the pipeline are filling it a lot slower. It's,
right.
For sure.
So that's for the health departments, we're faced with either trying to poach an experienced sanitarian away from another health department.
Yep.
Because we're not getting a lot of migration into the state of Connecticut from young professionals. Most people are leaving after they get their college degree. They leave Connecticut, unfortunately, because it's expensive to live here. But we do get so we're either poaching people or we're hiring somebody with no experience and just
training them.
Right. And it takes a couple of years before a very, very brand new sanitarian who's got no experience can really do a lot of things independently. So, but we're at that point now with Chatham Health. Our 2 young sanitarians are doing a great job, and I think we've got the right mix. We've got a couple of sanitarians who've got 15, 20 years of experience. We've got a couple that have 2 years experience. We've got one sanitarian that's got 35 years of experience. So I think we've got a really, really excellent mix in our environmental health staff here at Chatham, which is really great. On the other side of things, COVID-19, we're I think we're coming down off our peak of what we're calling the Delta wave.
Uh-huh.
So we were accelerating, through the month of July and August, and now for the last 4 weeks, we have really been at a plateau. And this most recent week of reporting, we've seen the numbers start to come down a little bit. Portland in particular has fared pretty well. Right now, Portland's in what we call the yellow alert stage, so that's between 5 and 10 cases per 100,000. Portland's at 9.2. We had 5 fewer cases in the last week report, which we'll update today. I hope to see further reductions. We had 5 fewer cases last week than we did the week before. So that's good news for Portland. And on the vaccination front, I think these two things go hand in hand. Portland has a relatively high vaccination rate.
Mm-hmm.
Right now, in the town of Portland, we are approaching 70% of the total population having been fully
That's
vaccinated.
good. That's good.
Which really is tremendous, especially when you think that between 10 and 12% of the population is too young to be vaccinated.
Mm-hmm.
So we're over 80% of the eligible population in town having been fully vaccinated.
Mm-hmm.
Among our youngest kids, our school-age kids, 12 to 17, we're approaching 60% having been fully vaccinated, which is very good.
Yeah.
It's not where we need to be. We need to be higher, but it's very good. It's better than some of our other neighboring towns. So I think we're heading in the right direction on that front. I think our schools have fared pretty well so far when it comes to COVID-19. There have not been many cases who have entered Portland Public Schools.
Right.
And that's just a reflection of the fact that we don't have a lot of COVID-19 in Portland right now. Like I said, we're in the yellow alert level, so that's not the best level, but it's pretty good. And when we don't have a lot of COVID-19 in town, we're not going to see a lot of cases come into schools.
Yeah,
That's
right.
good. Let's keep it that way.
Right.
Yeah, let's keep it that way, exactly. And I think, as we still don't know why we may be coming down off this Delta wave. One theory is, and I'm not necessarily subscribing to this theory, but one theory is that we simply have reached a level of immunity from both natural exposure to the virus and
Mm-hmm.
vaccination that the virus doesn't have many other places to go.
Right.
It could be.
I'm not necessarily subscribing to that because we have had some really good September weather. So we had really wet July and August, okay, so we saw an acceleration in July and August. We've had some really nice weather in September. So I think a lot of people are spending a lot of time outside. Kids are back at school, so maybe they're not engaging in the kind of social behaviors that result in transmission as much because they're in school, which is a relatively safe place to be. Everybody's wearing masks. Mostly all the teachers are vaccinated. So schools are actually a safer place to be than, for example, like a birthday party.
Right.
So I'm not sure where we're going to end up once we all start, going indoors and having Halloween parties and having, Thanksgiving and things like that. But I will just put it out there that one of the theories as to why we may be coming down off this Delta wave is that there's a level of population immunity that the virus is finding it more difficult to be transmitted.
Sure.
We'll see. We'll see how October, November, and December go. I think right now I just recommend to everybody before then, go get vaccinated if you haven't been vaccinated.
Right. Now, is there the a V variant or something? Is that the latest one that's out there or something?
So right now, there are a lot of variants that are being watched by CDC and by the World Health Organization. At this point, none of them, besides Delta, which we're currently dealing with, have been identified as variants that are likely to impact us. And that's for one simple reason. The Delta variant is so much more transmissible than the others that are out there that it's simply out-competing them for host.
Okay.
So let's just go back to sort of the basics of viral transmission. When you have something that is more contagious than another, it is going to spread faster and it's going to spread to more people, and it simply outcompetes the other variants.
Mm-hmm.
So that's Delta. I mean, until we find a variant, which I hope we never do, that is either more contagious than Delta or that is able to evade natural and vaccine-based immunity,
Mm-hmm.
this is it. This is what we'll be dealing with. We will be dealing with Delta and nothing else.
Right.
And I think as the world becomes more highly vaccinated, we will be less likely to find new variants emerging. So that's why when you hear conversations about, should we be shipping more vaccine to places like Africa, the principal benefit to this country is to prevent the emergence of variants that might cause us problems like Delta did. Delta emerged out of India when they had their really horrendous outbreak earlier this year.
Right.
And that's why we were saddled with this Delta wave. And so what we want to see is fewer of these variants having an opportunity to reassort their genes and to outcompete Delta, because we just don't want to know what's worse. Delta's been pretty bad.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So I think we're, that's, I really hope that we continue to come down off this peak and that we, have a good holiday season.
Right, right.
That's what I'm hoping for, but I think it remains to be seen.
Now, are you finding, Russ, in the district and so forth? I know there's obviously you have the anti-maskers out there and so forth, and the anti-vaxxers, and surprisingly, there's even a fair amount of pushback on healthcare workers that opt not to be vaccinated and so forth. Do you get a sense of that within the district at all?
Yes. So my sense is that is an extremely vocal, small minority of people. I do get emails, I do get calls from residents. The most vocal seem to be parents of young children who would prefer their children not have to wear masks in schools. I don't typically hear from people who are against vaccines. I don't, but we know that there are people who are hesitant to get vaccinated for a number of reasons. Mostly it is simply a hesitancy around the vaccines being new and them being a little bit worried about, not having any, multi-year long-term safety studies done. And I think that's where we see the people, the few teachers, because there's a vaccine mandate for teachers, and a vaccine mandate for state employees and for healthcare. The most of the hesitancy is around the lack of the long-term safety studies.
Huh.
So most of it is not what I would call the true conspiracy theorists, the people who think that this is about some effort for the government to control people's minds with microchips or track people's movements, or that it is an attempt at population control by the government. I've heard that one, that really this is about, rendering people infertile, which is complete nonsense. So most of the hesitancy is really about the long-term safety issues. And I think, as more and more people get vaccinated and fewer people have bad reactions to the vaccine, which is really a vanishingly small number of people who have any kind of bad reaction.
Right.
More people will get vaccinated. It's
Sure.
just slow. But we do hear about those folks. I do hear from the people who want their kids to go to school without masks. And I think some of what I hear from those folks, in particular the people who are anti-mask, is that they want this to be about choice, that they want parents to be able to choose if children have to wear masks for their own protection. I think that's a messaging issue. The principal benefit to wearing masks is as a method of source control for the wearer. So it prevents the wearer's respiratory droplets from getting out and being distributed into the environment, potentially infecting others. There's a small benefit to the wearer that will protect them a little bit from respiratory droplets that may reach their nose or mouth from others. But most of the benefit is to prevent the wearer from getting their potentially infectious droplets out in the environment. So I think people who say, I want the choice to whether or not my child will be protected from a mask, are really saying, I'm okay with my child spreading their potentially infectious respiratory droplets to others, because that's what will happen.
Sure. And it's a public health issue,
Yes,
obviously.
exactly. This is old school public health. Same with, vaccines do protect the person who gets the vaccine, of course, but they also prevent people from spreading the virus to others. We know that the Delta variant can be transmitted by people who have been vaccinated, but the data that both the CDC and the state of Connecticut have put out there is that people who are unvaccinated are still 5 times more likely to become infected.
Mm-hmm.
So for people who say, why bother with, why do, for example, people who are fully vaccinated not have to quarantine when we know that they can get and spread the virus? Well, that's true. But people who are fully vaccinated are 5 times less likely to get infected and spread the virus to others.
Right.
So I think that's the difference, why there's a difference in these recommendations. But I do feel like there's a messaging problem around these things.
Yeah. Well, I think, too, you get into a situation where the it becomes very apolitical, with a lot of employers, American Airlines and, the federal government, mandating, vaccinations and so forth for conditions of employment, even the NFL, as far as that goes. And again, it boils down to, public health, but, there you have the folks that, are playing the, choice card,
Correct.
being freedom.
And that debate has been going on for 110 years in this country.
Yep.
I was looking at I wish if we were not on an audio podcast, I would share this image. But I was reading a 107-year-old monthly bulletin from the State Department of Public Health in Connecticut. Okay, and it was from 1914, which is the very beginning of the smallpox vaccination campaign.
Yeah.
And the bulletin was surrounding what they called anti-vaccine propaganda. And it was basically the same thing that we're dealing with today. So there were individuals in 1914, just as there are today, demanding that getting a vaccine be a choice. And it is still largely a choice. It is just, your choices between, in a lot of circumstances, getting the vaccine and continuing to work in your chosen industry or profession, or getting the vaccine and being able to send your child to college.
Mm-hmm.
So there's still a choice, but it really is a difficult choice for people who don't want to get the vaccine in some cases. So nobody is forcing anybody to get a vaccine, but they are basically making you choose between your profession and getting vaccinated.
Right. Do you want a paycheck or not?
Right. And so this debate's been going on for a long time, and in fact, it's been long established in the Constitution of the United States that the government can compel people to be vaccinated. And it started with smallpox, actually, smallpox outbreak in Massachusetts, I believe in Boston.
Yes.
Was the case law that established the government's right to, or the government's authority to require vaccination among people. So,
do you know if there was any Supreme Court decision on that?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, I wish I had the case law in my back pocket because I could give it to you. Maybe I'll see if I can dig it up for next time. But
sure.
Yeah, that'd be interesting.
But it was long established, more than 100 years ago, during the smallpox outbreak in Boston.
Well, and when you expand some of the safety regulations and rules and or laws, Russ, you look at something as simple as wearing those steel-toed shoes that many professions require their workers to wear, or the fact that we must wear seatbelts, safety belts within a vehicle. And there's other industries and sports where you have to wear a helmet in order to participate or compete. So, as you say, it's not something new. It's something that's been talked about in other generations. But some of it's been resolved. And I think that there is, as you've pointed out, there is case law, there's Supreme Court law that says there are certain things that as a society we've determined, given our laws and our Constitution, that this is the way we're going to proceed. My grandfather, the story is, had smallpox, and it was sort of a miracle. In fact, I have a copy of something that was in the New Britain Herald that he survived smallpox. He and another man were sent to an apartment in New Britain, and they had to live there for a period of time. And then once it was determined they didn't have the disease anymore, they could come out. So the experience of having these communicable diseases disrupt your life, your family, either through disability, death, or other means, is largely vacant in some people's history and in their experience. And this COVID-19 has created some of that history for many families. And it's a lot of stories that will probably be told as time goes on about how important the profession that you're filling for us, Russ, is to us. And I think we've said this before on this podcast, that public health is so very important to us, to the propagation of our species, as well as just the enjoyment of life. And, we want to say thank you to you as our public health official to be guiding us through this. And you've done a very good job. And many of us have our well-being to thank you for. So
Well, I appreciate you
Thank you.
saying that, Susan. But it's the profession has really been around, as you said, for
Yeah.
a really long time. We're fortunate to have a good scientific backbone for making the decisions that we do, and that scientific backbone is called epidemiology.
Mm-hmm.
The issue just becomes, that everybody, I've said it on this podcast before, everybody has their own personal comfort level with the same risk.
Yeah.
And some people are uncomfortable with any government agency telling them that the risk to them and their family and their neighbors, et cetera, is unacceptably high, and therefore we have to do all these things. Because there are people who might say, I'm comfortable with the risk
Sure.
posed by COVID-19
Sure.
running rampant in our communities. To use a parallel, polio, for example.
Yeah.
People will say kids don't get affected by COVID-19 as badly as adults, which is true. The principal risk involving with polio, especially for kids, was paralysis, permanent neurological damage that results in paralysis. Polio is a much more infectious disease than COVID-19, so once it started circulating in the community, just about everybody got exposed very quickly. But only about 1 in 1,000 people suffered from what they called acute flaccid paralysis, so the poliomyelitis. Only 1 in 1,000. So when I say that, it's actually not that different from the bad consequences of COVID-19 among kids. 1 in 1,000 will end up being very, very sick or hospitalized. And so when I put that in context, nobody would argue that we shouldn't be vaccinating kids for polio. I just think we have to remember our history here.
Yeah.
And I hope one day history will look kindly again on public health and the interventions we put in place during this time when we write the story about COVID-19, because it really is a very nasty disease.
Yes.
Death, dying from COVID-19 is not the only bad outcome, especially for kids.
Right.
So, long-term damage to the lungs, yet unknown long-term consequences, multi-system inflammatory syndrome, which affects kids. These kinds of things are really, really bad. Just because somebody doesn't die of it doesn't mean we shouldn't do everything we can to prevent its transmission.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely.
And I do think you've talked about this as well, is the whole communication strategy and rollout has a lot to be said about that. I think that some of the communications has been excellent, and other parts of communication I think have been either misunderstood or they've been contradictory or otherwise not as smooth as maybe we'd like. A lot of this has been learn as you go. And it's very challenging when you're dealing with many, many people trying to communicate to them, Russ, what the knowledge is, what the science is, and then how do you practice it and what is the best way to do it. So, that's, again, where an epidemiologist comes in and that expert gets up and explains things as you do. And it really does help with compliance if your communications are good and they're accurate and they're available.
Yeah. I think one of the biggest challenges when it comes to communication with this is that it's an emerging infectious disease.
Right.
So we're learning as we go along.
Yeah.
And so when the recommendations change, it's a communications challenge, and the recommendations have changed, sometimes in a matter of weeks from when you put something out there. We said fully vaccinated people, in May, fully vaccinated people didn't have to wear masks anymore.
Yes.
Vaccines work to prevent asymptomatic, infection and transmission, period. Then the Delta variant comes along, and suddenly people who are fully vaccinated are getting infected and spreading it. So suddenly we have to backtrack, because actually fully vaccinated people should still wear masks. So it's just been and that's just one example. It's just the most recent. Yeah. It's been such a challenge. Booster doses. If I asked a person on the street who's eligible today to get a booster shot, 9 out of 10 would probably get some aspect of it wrong. Actually, 9 out of 10 people who work in my office probably get some aspect of it wrong at this point.
Yeah.
So it's just the communications in an effort to get things out as fast as possible, which I agree with. Sometimes those messages have to be changed.
Yeah.
Sometimes those messages weren't exactly correct. But when you're dealing with an emerging infectious disease and rapid dissemination of information is important, sometimes what gets left behind is, the the review, the adequacy of the message.
Sure.
Is this exactly right? Is this, who are we trying to reach with this?
Yeah.
So, difficult.
Well, exactly. And, Susan, you mentioned that, your ancestors there in New Britain with the polio and so forth.
Smallpox.
And
Yes.
smallpox. I'm
Smallpox,
sorry.
yeah.
But years ago, you remember we had leper colonies.
Yes, yes,
people that had
certainly.
leprosy and so forth.
I know.
They were sent to go to a place.
Exactly. Well, Portland had a pest house, which I believe is where you went when you had smallpox. It was is that the right term that I used to use, Russ? That you would go to a particular place?
Yeah, well, like the big example I keep thinking of is with tuberculosis. There used to be sanitariums
Yes.
where
Yeah.
people would go because they had tuberculosis and didn't want to spread it to stay with other people with tuberculosis. So I think they've had a lot of names: leper colonies, sanitariums, quarantine zones, whatever. It's a different name for basically the same practice, which is separate when you don't have a good treatment for disease.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You separate the ill from the well, and you separate those who may become ill from those who have not been exposed, called quarantine. So it's been around for centuries. These are just old school public health practices.
Sure.
Now we've got a vaccine.
Yeah, there
So
you
it's
go.
a relatively new school public health practice. And that's the best single thing anybody can do to get us past this, get a vaccine.
Absolutely. Well, as it keeps
Interesting.
evolving. It keeps evolving, and the the news cycle changes every day.
Yep.
As far as that goes. But anyway,
And Dave, we're not alone in this. We're all sort of dependent on one another for our behavior and being able to help one another not get the disease, whether it's, Russ encouraging us to get vaccinated.
Sure.
And
Well, it's-
another person encouraging us to wear our face covering when
Sure.
we're in crowds. So
absolutely.
we do help one another, and I appreciate all that people do to try to keep us well.
Well, and
Thank you.
again, communicating. That's the thing, and
Yeah.
hopefully this podcast is a good means of communicating to people. A lot of the facts and a lot of the fallacies, and getting the people educated to the point where they can make their own decisions and work it that way. But it is important. So anyway.
Definitely.
All right. Well, Russ, thank you so much. I appreciate your input today, and it's good to have you back on the air here.
Good to be back.
And again, this is our actually, I'm looking up on the board. This is our episode 42 of our Town of Portland podcast. And again, we're here at our Town Tech Educational Podcast Studio with our First Selectwoman, Ms. Susan Bransfield, and our Director of Health for the Chatham Health District, Mr. Russ Melmond. And I'm your host, Dave Kuzbisky, and tune in and subscribe. And again, this podcast is going to also be aired on the public access channel, Comcast Channel 15. So if you want to listen to it there and get all of the relevant information. And also, guys, I'm going to let the cat out of the bag here a little bit. And we're talking about succession planning and so forth. I am going to be starting a podcast very shortly, in probably the month of October, on careers you never heard of in the wastewater and water industry. So I'm going to be interviewing a lot of the personnel, and I'll probably be calling some of your people as far as in Sanitarianville.
Oh yeah, well they inspect septic systems, so I
Sure.
think that'd be a pretty good interview.
Exactly.
Sounds great.
In making people aware that there are careers out there that you may have never thought of, and so forth. So
I will subscribe. Sounds great.
When you hear the ding,
Yes. Ring the bell.
we'll have a new podcast.
Sounds
So,
great.
Anyway, so Russ, thank you. Susan, thank you.
You're
and
welcome.
and
My
it's we're going to get another one in here before you leave, Susan.
All
so,
right. Sounds good.
We're not going. And
Thank you.
and I think we're going to keep you. Russ wants to keep you on the board of directors for the Chatham Health District too.
That's my goal here. It'll be up to the town and you, Susan, of
That's
course. But
true.
I'm angling for it.
Thanks,
Fantastic.
Russ. Thanks, Russ.
Thanks, Russ. Thanks, Susan. And again, that wraps it up on our episode number 42 here at the Town of Portland podcast. So make sure that you wear your mask, stay home, stay safe, or whatever you have to do. But we'll see you next time. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Dave.
Thank you for joining us today. I'm your host, Dave Kosminski. Please tune in every week for new and relevant conversations about the town of Portland. You can find us at portlandct.org or at YouTube/Town of Portland, and now wherever you listen to your podcasts. If you've enjoyed our podcast, please consider subscribing and sharing with friends. This podcast was produced by the Town Tech Educational Partnership Program, which is a partnership between Portland High School and the Portland Town Hall. If you're looking to start a podcast for your business or organization, check out towntech.org/podcast to learn more.